In the winding valleys of ancient China, where mist clung to the mountain ridges and streams sang against stone, there was a family who lived modestly but with dignity. From the very beginning, their household was touched by something unusual, as though destiny had pressed its thumbprint upon them. It was into this household that Zhong Kui was born. His birth did not come quietly. The midwives later said that the lamps flickered in strange rhythms the night he arrived, and that the cries of the newborn had a depth more like a shout of command than the wail of a child. His parents, humble yet upright people, were filled with equal parts joy and unease. The boy was healthy and strong, but his face bore features that would forever set him apart. His eyes were piercing and large, his nose broad and his forehead prominent, all giving him an intensity that others would later call frightening. To his family, however, he was simply Zhong Kui, their son, destined for something unknown. As a child, he showed an early hunger for learning. While others his age ran through fields or played in the dirt, he preferred to sit beneath the shade of a tree with bamboo slips in hand, tracing characters with a brush as though each stroke revealed a secret of the universe. Neighbours would whisper when they saw him, some with admiration and some with suspicion. "He is a strange-looking boy," they said, "but his mind burns brighter than a lantern in winter." His parents nurtured his talent as best they could. They believed that in a world ruled by scholars and examinations, the key to rising above one's station was through knowledge. And indeed, Zhong Kui drank knowledge like a parched traveller at a spring. He memorized the Confucian classics, delved into histories of dynasties past, and showed a gift for poetry that astonished his teachers. Yet always, when he lifted his head from the scroll, people recoiled slightly at the sharpness of his gaze and the harshness of his countenance. But Zhong Kui himself did not notice. To him, the path was clear. He would become a great scholar official. He would serve the empire, bring justice, and secure honour for his family. His parents encouraged him in this dream, though in quiet moments his mother sometimes fretted, wondering if the world would look past his face to see the brilliance inside. Legends say that as a boy, Zhong Kui once encountered a wandering Taoist hermit in the marketplace. The old man stopped in his tracks when he saw the child, narrowing his eyes as though peering not at the boy but through him into the weave of fate itself. "This one," the hermit muttered, "is marked. His spirit is fierce like a general of heaven. But the world of men is cruel. Remember, child, greatness comes with both gift and burden." Then, before anyone could question him further, the hermit vanished into the crowd. Zhong Kui's family never forgot those words, and neither did he. From that moment he studied with even more determination, as though trying to fulfill a destiny he could not yet name. By the time he reached young adulthood, his reputation in the region was solid. He was the young man with the terrifying face and the dazzling mind. Those who dared speak with him discovered a wit sharp as a blade and a kindness beneath his gruff exterior. Yet those who only glanced at him from afar saw only the unsettling outline of a man who seemed half warrior, half scholar, with eyes that gleamed like coals. And so his path to the imperial examinations began, the great test that could elevate a commoner to a man of office, wealth, and prestige. For Zhong Kui, it was more than a test. It was the gateway to proving that one's mind mattered more than appearance. His parents prayed for his success, his teachers believed in his brilliance, and Zhong Kui himself carried the weight of all their hopes. But destiny, as it so often does, had prepared another path. In ancient China, the imperial examination was more than just a test. It was a crucible that could transform a farmer's son into a minister of the state. Every scroll of paper, every line of calligraphy, and every word of commentary carried the weight of generations. To succeed meant honour for one's ancestors, wealth for one's descendants, and the promise of serving under heaven's son, the emperor himself. Zhong Kui entered this path with a hunger that no one around him could match. He was not born into privilege, nor did he have connections at court. What he had was his mind, sharp, unyielding, and restless. From dawn until the lamps burned low at night, he studied. His brush danced over paper until his fingers were stained with ink, and he memorized the Analects, the Book of Rites, and the histories of dynasties long fallen. Where others struggled to remember passages, he could recite entire chapters, weaving their wisdom into arguments that startled even his tutors. The local scholars who supervised his learning often found themselves humbled. One teacher, a man revered in the county for his erudition, admitted after a debate, "This boy's mind is like a storm contained in a jar. If the jar breaks, the world will feel its force." Zhong Kui heard such praise with quiet resolve. To him, excellence was not an option, but a necessity. He knew the world judged him for his appearance, so he sharpened his intellect until no one could deny it. The imperial city, Chang'an, loomed in his dreams like a vision of paradise. The sprawling capital was said to be the heart of civilization, where scholars from every corner of the empire gathered to test their worth. Zhong Kui imagined himself there, not as an outcast mocked for his face, but as a man whose essays silenced entire halls with their brilliance. But his journey was not without shadows. Wherever he went, whispers followed. In marketplaces, children pointed at him until their mothers hushed them. In taverns, farmers exchanged jokes about his fierce eyes and broad, intimidating features. Even among fellow scholars, some kept their distance, as though his physical presence somehow tainted the purity of their scholarly pursuit. Zhong Kui bore these insults in silence. Outwardly, he showed no sign of injury. Inwardly, each word was a needle, driving him further toward the belief that only victory at the examinations could wipe away such scorn. When the time finally came for him to travel to the capital, his parents watched with mingled pride and worry. His father said, "Remember, my son, the pen is your sword. Do not let the sneers of men dull its edge." His mother, her eyes filled with unspoken fears, tied a simple charm of red thread around his wrist, a gesture of protection more heartfelt than any words. The journey to Chang'an was long, winding through rivers and mountains, across bustling towns and quiet villages. Zhong Kui travelled with a small group of fellow candidates. They spent their evenings beneath flickering oil lamps, rehearsing lines from Confucian classics, debating the finer points of philosophy, and dreaming of the honours that awaited them. Yet when Zhong Kui's face caught the glow of firelight, some of them averted their eyes, unable to reconcile the brilliance of his speech with the fear his appearance inspired. At last the gates of Chang'an rose before him, towering walls crowned with watchtowers, their silhouettes cutting into the sky. The city thrummed with life, merchants crying their wares, officials in flowing robes, soldiers marching with spears flashing in the sun. For Zhong Kui, it was like stepping into the heart of the world itself. Here, he told himself, he would prove that a man's worth lay in his mind, not in the shape of his face. The examination hall was a fortress of silence. Thousands of candidates filled its rows, each one sealed into a small cell with nothing but brush, ink, and paper. Days stretched into weeks, as they wrote essay after essay, verse after verse, weaving their knowledge into the required forms. Zhong Kui bent himself to the task with relentless focus, pouring out arguments so elegant and profound that examiners would later shake their heads in astonishment. His essays were said to have clarity like mountain air, precision like a sharpened blade, and a vision that touched upon the eternal order of heaven. When at last the ordeal ended, Zhong Kui emerged from the hall exhausted but triumphant. Among the candidates, whispers began, "This one will surely be the champion. This one's name will be sung across the empire." And indeed, when the results were announced, Zhong Kui had claimed the highest rank. He was to be named Zhuang Yuan, the top scholar of the realm, an honour that brought not only prestige but direct recognition from the emperor himself. But fate is rarely kind to those marked by destiny. As Zhong Kui prepared to step into the radiant future he had fought so hard to grasp, shadows stirred in the halls of power. Whispers of his face, his fearsome appearance, his unsuitability for high office began to creep into the ears of the court, and from those whispers would come the cruelest injustice of all. The imperial palace gleamed like a jewel under the morning sun. Its rooftops of glazed tiles shimmered with hues of gold and emerald, while carved dragons wound themselves along beams and balustrades, guardians of a realm that prided itself on order and harmony. To enter these halls as a Zhuang Yuan, the top scholar of the realm, was to ascend into the company of immortality. It meant that one's words could shape policy, one's hand could sign decrees, and one's name could be etched into the annals of history. For Zhong Kui, the day was to be the fulfillment of everything he had sacrificed, everything he had endured. The humiliation of childhood jeers, the sting of whispered insults, the isolation of being feared for his appearance. All of it would vanish when he knelt before the emperor and was recognized not for the shape of his face, but for the brilliance of his mind. Clad in fresh scholar's robes of deep blue, his hat tied firmly under his chin, he walked through the palace gates with measured steps. Other candidates stole glances at him, some in awe, others with a trace of envy. For they all knew that his essays had been unmatched, his arguments unassailable. He was the rightful champion of the exams. At last the moment arrived. In the great hall, filled with the scent of incense and the gleam of jade pillars, Zhong Kui and the other candidates knelt in neat rows. At the far end sat the emperor, draped in flowing yellow robes, the very embodiment of the mandate of heaven. His eyes swept over the rows of scholars, pausing briefly as they fell upon Zhong Kui. For an instant there was silence. Then the whispers began. Ministers shifted in their seats, their gazes fixed not on Zhong Kui's robes, nor on the scrolls that contained his brilliant essays, but on his face, his heavy brow, his piercing eyes, his fierce expression, all the features that had drawn ridicule since childhood, now hung in the air like a shadow. The emperor listened as the ministers murmured among themselves. Some leaned forward, their voices dripping with doubt. "Your Majesty, how can such a man represent the refinement of our empire?" Another added, "His writings may be pure, but his appearance, it inspires fear, not respect. Imagine foreign envoys laying eyes upon him." Zhong Kui, still kneeling, heard every word. His heart pounded in his chest, not with fear, but with disbelief. Was this not the very place where the worth of a man was meant to be measured by his mind? Was this not the promise of the examinations, that talent alone could carry a man to greatness? Yet here, in the shining heart of the empire, the oldest prejudice of all reared its head. The emperor, swayed by the chorus of objections, made his decision. In a voice that carried through the hall, he declared, "Though Zhong Kui's talent is great, his appearance is ill-favoured and unsuited for high office. His name shall be struck from the list of honoured scholars." The words fell like a sword across Zhong Kui's soul. Around him the other candidates shifted, some with pity, others with smug relief. To be denied not because of failure, but because of one's face, it was an insult deeper than any defeat. Zhong Kui rose to his feet, his body trembling with fury and anguish. He raised his voice, his words echoing off the jade pillars. "You preach the purity of the examinations, yet cast them aside when it suits your eyes. You speak of virtue and fairness, yet condemn a man for that which heaven has given him. Is this the justice of the empire? Is this the honour of the Son of Heaven?" Gasps rippled through the hall. No one dared speak to the emperor in such a tone. Guards stepped forward, hands on their swords, but the emperor lifted a hand to stop them. He stared at Zhong Kui, perhaps with guilt, perhaps with unease, but he said nothing. The silence was unbearable. Zhong Kui felt the weight of his life's work collapsing into dust. He had clawed his way toward this day, believing that intellect could overcome cruelty, that diligence could silence mockery. Yet here, at the very gates of glory, he was cast aside for something he could not change. And so, in one last act of defiance, Zhong Kui turned his fury upon himself. Reaching for the dagger at his side, the ceremonial blade scholars often carried, he drew it in a swift motion. His voice thundered once more. "If this empire has no place for me in life, then let me claim justice in death." With that he drove the blade into his chest, collapsing upon the polished floor of the hall. Blood spread across the jade tiles, bright and terrible. The ministers cried out in horror. The emperor's face paled, his hand frozen in midair. And Zhong Kui's, betrayed by the system he had trusted, fell into darkness. That day, the palace whispered of the scholar who had slain himself before the throne, and though his body grew still, his spirit did not rest. For a man who had lived his life in defiance of cruelty would not yield so easily to the silence of the grave. The hall of the emperor, which only moments before had been filled with the rustle of silks and the murmurs of scholars, now echoed with the stillness of death. Zhong Kui's body lay crumpled before the throne, his scholar's robes stained with the deep red of his own blood. Ministers pressed their sleeves to their mouths in shock. Some whispered prayers, others shook their heads as though trying to dispel what they had just seen. The emperor himself sat rigid, his eyes fixed on the lifeless figure at his feet. There had been suicides in the palace before, disgraced officials, condemned generals, wronged courtiers, but never had there been one so public, so deliberate, and so charged with righteous fury. Zhong Kui's act was more than despair. It was an indictment of the entire system. He had cut his life short not in shame, but in protest. And that made his death unbearable to those who had orchestrated his humiliation. Servants hurried forward, lifting his body and carrying it from the hall. The polished jade tiles were scrubbed, but the stain remained faintly visible, no matter how much they wiped. Some said that at night, under the pale glow of the moon, the blood shimmered fresh once again, as though the earth itself refused to forget. Word spread through the city like wildfire. Some whispered in taverns, shaking their heads at the emperor's cruelty. Others told the story with hushed awe, the scholar who had been denied for his face, who had answered with the ultimate act of defiance. Among the common folk, Zhong Kui's name became a quiet rallying cry, a symbol of injustice endured and protested. But in the palace, ministers spoke his name only in whispers, fearing that even mentioning him might stir his angry spirit. And stir it did. On the 7th night after his death, the emperor dreamed. In the dream, he walked alone through the silent corridors of the palace. The lanterns guttered, their flames bending as though blown by a wind that was not there. A chill pressed against his skin, and the silence deepened until it seemed the whole world had gone still. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. It was Zhong Kui. His scholar's robes hung heavy and dark as though soaked once more in blood. His eyes burned with fire, and his face, the very face that had been called ugly, terrifying, unsuitable, now radiated a power that froze the emperor where he stood. In his hand, Zhong Kui held a sword, gleaming with a light not of this world. "Son of heaven," Zhong Kui's voice thundered, "you cast me aside for my appearance, yet heaven itself has judged me differently. I have not returned for your throne, nor for your ministers, but for justice that you refused me." The emperor trembled, his words caught in his throat. He tried to call for guards, but none came. The palace around him dissolved into mist, leaving only the fiery gaze of the scholar he had wronged. Zhong Kui raised the sword high, and for a moment the emperor thought it would fall upon him. But instead the blade turned, pointing not at the living ruler, but at the darkness gathering behind him. From the mist, shapes began to writhe. Demons, grotesque and snarling, their claws dripping with hunger. They rushed forward, only to be struck down by Zhong Kui's sword, their cries scattering like ashes in the wind. "You feared my face," Zhong Kui declared, his voice echoing across the dream. "But it is this face that demons will flee from. You denied me a place among men, and so heaven has given me a place above demons. I shall hunt them, bind them, and cast them where they cannot harm the living. I am Zhong Kui, the vanquisher of evil." With those words he leapt into the horde of demons, his sword flashing like lightning, his figure towering like a storm. The emperor awoke with a cry, drenched in sweat, the echo of Zhong Kui's voice still ringing in his ears. From that night onward, the emperor ordered Zhong Kui to be honoured, his image painted on palace gates and doors to guard against evil. Ministers who had once sneered at his appearance now bowed before his memory, terrified of invoking his wrath. Yet Zhong Kui's story did not end with the emperor's dream, for in the realms beyond life, where spirits wander and demons prowl, a new chapter had begun. No longer a wrong scholar, Zhong Kui had been reborn as something greater, the relentless hunter of demons, the protector of the innocent, the terror of all things wicked. And so the legend of Zhong Kui took root, spreading from palace to village, from whispered tales to painted icons. His face, once scorned, became a shield. His sword, once ceremonial, became divine. In death he achieved what life had denied him, a place of honour and unshakable power. When Zhong Kui's soul tore free from his body, it did not drift quietly into the ancestral halls of his forefathers, nor did it vanish into the void. Instead, it blazed with the fury of a man who had been betrayed in the very heart of justice. The guardians of the afterlife, black-clad spirits with ox heads and horse faces, came to escort him, but even they hesitated before his glare. His presence was not like that of ordinary souls. It pressed against them, heavy and commanding, as though he were not the judged but the judge. They led him down the winding path into the underworld, where the air smelled of iron and incense, and the cries of lost spirits echoed through cavernous halls. Torches of ghostly flame lined the roads, casting shifting shadows that seemed to whisper of endless sorrow. At the end of the path loomed the palace of Yama, the king of hell, who sat upon a throne of black stone, a scroll of fates unrolled before him. Zhong Kui was brought before this fearsome monarch, his chains clinking, his spirit glowing faintly from within. Yama lifted his head, his fiery eyes piercing into the scholar's soul. He had judged emperors and beggars alike, but rarely had he encountered a soul with such intensity. The king of hell spoke, his voice deep as a gong. "Zhong Kui of the mortal world, you died by your own hand, your life cut short before its time. Do you know what awaits such souls?" Zhong Kui bowed, his face neither humble nor afraid. "I know well the laws of the afterlife. Those who take their own lives wander as restless ghosts denied peace. Yet I tell you this, I did not die in weakness nor in despair. I died in defiance of injustice. If such an act earns me the fate of a hungry ghost, then so be it. But know that my spirit will never bow to cruelty, in this world or the next." The hall trembled with his words. The attendants gasped, for never had a soul dared to speak so boldly before Yama. Yet the king of hell only stroked his beard, his burning eyes fixed upon the scholar. At last he laughed, not mockingly, but with a weight of recognition. "Indeed," Yama said, "you are no ordinary man. You were wronged by heaven's servants, denied your rightful place because of shallow eyes. But here, in the realm of truth, your spirit burns brighter than 1,000 others. Such fire is not meant to wither as a wandering ghost. It is meant to wield a sword." He rose from his throne, and the shadows of the hall seemed to bow. "I name you Zhong Kui, great vanquisher of demons. From this day forth you shall roam the worlds of the living and the dead. You shall hunt the foul spirits who prey upon mortals, bind them in chains, and drag them before my judgment. Where demons spread chaos, your name shall bring terror. Where innocents cry for protection, your presence shall bring peace." At his command, attendants brought forth a great sword, forged not of mortal iron, but of pure spiritual force, its blade shimmering with ghostly fire. Yama placed it in Zhong Kui's hands. The moment he grasped it, the hall quaked. The chains that bound him shattered, falling to the floor with a ringing finality. Zhong Kui stood tall, his robes transforming into the attire of a demon queller, wide sleeves, flowing belt, boots that struck sparks on the stone floor. His face, once a mark of scorn among men, now radiated an aura so fierce that the very demons lurking at the edges of the hall fled deeper into the shadows. But Yama was not yet finished. With a wave of his hand, he summoned forth a host of small, cowering demons, imps with twisted faces and clawed hands. Zhong Kui's sword blazed, ready to strike them down, but Yama raised his hand again. "Not all demons are beyond redemption," he said. "These shall serve you. Under your command they will hunt their own kind, drag them from their lairs, and keep the balance of the worlds. You will be their master, and they will fear you more than they fear me." The imps grovelled at Zhong Kui's feet, their wide eyes darting between their new master and the king of hell. And thus Zhong Kui was not only given a weapon, but also an army, forged from the very things he was destined to subdue. When the decree was complete, drums thundered through the underworld, echoing across its rivers and mountains. The scribes of hell etched Zhong Kui's name into their scrolls, not among the damned, nor among the blessed ancestors, but in a place of its own. Zhong Kui, Demon Queller, protector of the innocent. And so, with sword in hand and demons at his back, Zhong Kui began his march through the shadows, destined to make the worlds of both the living and the dead tremble at the sound of his name. From the gates of the underworld, Zhong Kui strode forth, no longer a wrong scholar but a hunter of horrors. His sword glowed with the cold fire of judgment, and behind him shuffled a band of lesser demons, pressed into his service, bound by the fear of his wrath. Where once he had walked among men unnoticed or mocked, now even the shadows themselves seemed to part at his passing. The world of the living was never free of spirits. Some were restless ancestors, tethered by unfinished business. Others were wayward shades, lost between realms. But darker than these were the Yao and Gui, demons and malevolent ghosts who sought to feed on the weakness of mortals, to sow fear and to corrupt the living. For centuries they had lurked in ruined temples, haunted forests, and the corners of men's homes. Now they found themselves hunted. Zhong Kui's first act as vanquisher is still told in hushed voices. In the foothills of a small village, a demon had taken root in an abandoned shrine. It fed on the life of children, luring them with whispers and leaving them sickly and pale. The villagers prayed, offered incense, even burned the shrine in desperation, but still the evil remained. When Zhong Kui arrived, his presence fell upon the place like a storm rolling in from the mountains. The demon, sensing danger, appeared in its true form, a hulking beast with the body of a man, the head of a boar, and tusks dripping with the blood of its victims. It roared, shaking the earth, confident that no mortal could stand against it. But Zhong Kui was no mortal. He raised his sword, its blade flashing with a light that was neither of sun nor moon, and spoke with a voice that rang like thunder. "You prey upon the weak, you corrupt the innocent. Today your judgment has come." The demon charged, claws tearing through the ground. Zhong Kui met it head-on, his sword cleaving through its tusks, his eyes burning with a fury that froze the creature mid-lunge. With a single sweep, he severed its form, casting it into the earth where it dissolved into smoke and ash. The villagers who had gathered at a distance fell to their knees, bowing to the man whose face was fierce but whose hand had saved them. For the first time in life or death, Zhong Kui's countenance was not feared, but revered. From that day, tales spread quickly. In mountain valleys, farmers spoke of the scholar with the terrible face and the heavenly sword. In river towns, fishermen claimed to have seen him stride across the banks, dragging wailing demons in chains behind him. Even in the bustling markets of Chang'an, whispers spread. Zhong Kui hunts. Zhong Kui protects. Zhong Kui sees through darkness. Yet his work was not done alone. His band of demon servants grew with every hunt. When he captured a particularly cunning or wicked spirit, he did not always destroy it. Instead, he bound it to his service, forcing it to use its powers against its own kind. These lesser demons, once agents of chaos, became unwilling soldiers in a growing army of justice. At night, people said, you could hear them whining and groaning as they marched behind their master, carrying cages filled with captured ghosts, each awaiting their judgment in the halls of Yama. But Zhong Kui himself remained relentless. He did not revel in cruelty nor seek glory. Each demon slain, each ghost bound, was another weight lifted from the shoulders of the living. His mission was not vengeance alone. Though his death had been bitter, his soul found purpose in ensuring that others would not suffer from the injustices of the unseen world. In time, even other gods and immortals took notice. It was said that when the celestial generals of heaven looked upon Zhong Kui's work, they recognized in him the spirit of a warrior, though he had never lifted a soldier's spear in life. Taoist priests whispered that his name had been written into the celestial registers, marking him not merely as a spirit of vengeance, but as a guardian whose task would never end. One tale tells of how Zhong Kui was summoned during a festival night in Chang'an itself. The emperor, still haunted by his dream of Zhong Kui, ordered great wards placed around the palace. Yet demons, cunning and defiant, slipped into the city, intent on feasting upon the chaos of celebration. Just as lanterns lit the sky, the demons descended in twisted forms, but before they could strike, Zhong Kui appeared. Standing atop the palace gates, sword blazing, he bellowed a challenge. The demons froze. Some tried to flee, others transformed into smoke, but Zhong Kui's imps caught them, dragging them shrieking into nets of fire. By dawn, the city was free of shadows, and the emperor ordered that Zhong Kui's image be painted on every palace door. And so the pattern was set. Zhong Kui walked between worlds, neither fully of the living nor entirely of the dead, feared by demons, honoured by mortals. His face, once a curse, had become a weapon sharper than any blade, for evil spirits could not bear to meet his gaze. His sword, once a ceremonial scholar's blade, now cleaved through the very essence of corruption. In life, Zhong Kui had been denied office because he frightened men. In death, that very fear became his crown, his shield, and his purpose. As word of Zhong Kui's deeds spread, his legend began to stretch far beyond the scenes of his battles. Villagers who had never seen him claimed to feel his presence in the rustle of leaves at night, in the sudden extinguishing of a lamp just before misfortune struck, or in the fleeting vision of a towering figure with wild eyes chasing shadows through the dark. What had once been a story of a wronged scholar became a growing faith. Zhong Kui was not merely a hunter of demons, he was a protector of the living. It began with a simple practice in the imperial palace. After his dream of Zhong Kui vanquishing demons, the emperor commanded court painters to capture his image. They portrayed him with fierce eyes, a long flowing beard and a broad sword in hand. This painting was hung above the palace gates, not as ornament, but as defence. From that day forward, palace servants swore that the corridors grew quieter, that shadows no longer lingered too long, and that the whispers of unseen spirits were driven away. Soon nobles and ministers imitated the emperor. They commissioned paintings and woodblock prints of Zhong Kui to hang on their gates, hoping that his terrifying visage would frighten away evil spirits before they even dared cross the threshold. Merchants followed suit, adorning their shops with his likeness. And then, as the custom spread, even humble villagers began to sketch his form on scraps of paper or carve his figure onto door panels, praying that Zhong Kui would guard their homes at night. During the Lunar New Year, the tradition deepened. Families painted or pasted large images of Zhong Kui on their doors, believing that as the year turned and restless spirits prowled in search of mischief, his gaze would scatter them like crows. The festival, once only a time of joy, now carried a sense of security as well. Children could sleep without fear of nightmares, and parents could rest easier knowing the Demon Queller watched from their threshold. But his protection was not confined to the home. Students preparing for the imperial examinations, those same grueling trials that had defined Zhong Kui's own life and death, began to pray to him as a patron. They saw in him a spirit who understood their suffering, the endless nights of study, the crushing weight of expectations, and the injustice of being judged by superficial measures. Although Zhong Kui himself had been denied the fruits of success, he became the one who could guide others to theirs. In time, he was honoured not only as a guardian against evil, but also as a protector of scholars. Taoist priests wove Zhong Kui into their rituals. In ceremonies of exorcism, they would invoke his name, calling upon his authority to banish wayward spirits. Often, they claimed that when his name was spoken with sincerity, a sudden chill would descend upon the room, as though his shadow had stepped through the veil. Sometimes, when offerings of wine or roasted meat were left at an altar dedicated to him, villagers swore the food vanished faster than human hands could take it, a sign that Zhong Kui had accepted their devotion. His image also began to evolve. Artists depicted him in flowing robes and scholar's hat, but always with a ferocious expression, sword raised, sometimes accompanied by his retinue of demons bound in chains. In some paintings he rode upon a tiger, its stripes blazing like fire, a fitting steed for one who prowled between worlds. In others, he appeared surrounded by captured spirits, dragging them toward judgment. To mortals, these depictions were terrifying, but that was the point. The very face that had doomed him in life now became his greatest gift in death. Zhong Kui's legend reached into the dreams of the people. Parents told their children bedtime stories of the Demon Queller who chased nightmares away. Fishermen, before casting their nets at dawn, whispered prayers to him so that river demons would not pull them under. Travellers invoked his name before setting foot on lonely mountain roads, believing he would scatter the ghosts of the wilds. Even emperors continued to claim visions of him, some ordering festivals in his honour where plays and operas depicted his great battles. Through all of this, Zhong Kui's role shifted. He was no longer only the wronged scholar or the avenger of his own injustice. He became a guardian woven into the fabric of daily life. His sword was no longer just for demons, but for every shadow that threatened the safety of those who could not defend themselves. His fierce gaze became a shield, his terrible visage a comfort. And so, across generations, Zhong Kui was not merely remembered, he was relied upon. By the time centuries had passed, Zhong Kui was no longer just a figure whispered about in villages, or prayed to in quiet offerings. He had become a character who lived in the very fabric of China's culture. His story, once rooted in tragedy and vengeance, transformed into something greater, a myth performed, sung, painted, and celebrated across generations. In the grand tradition of Chinese opera, Zhong Kui became one of the most striking figures ever to stride onto the stage. Audiences knew him immediately, the actor's face painted in stark black and red, with eyes outlined in bold strokes that made them flare with supernatural intensity. His robe was wide-sleeved and flowing, embroidered with demons writhing at his feet, while his sword flashed under the stage lights. When the actor let out Zhong Kui's thunderous voice, audiences shivered, not with fear alone, but with awe. These operas told of his legendary hunts, how he stormed temples infested by demons, how he dragged chains heavy with captured spirits across mountain passes, how he saved villages from horrors lurking in the night. In one popular tale, he was depicted chasing away pestilence itself, cutting down the spirit of disease before it could enter a city. Audiences cheered, for in their minds Zhong Kui was not only a character of myth, but a living force who might truly be protecting them from unseen harm. Festivals amplified this belief. During the Lunar New Year, and especially the Dragon Boat Festival, processions paraded through streets with performers dressed as Zhong Kui. The Demon Queller strode at the head of the line, flanked by his mock demon servants, actors painted with grotesque masks, chains clanking as they stumbled. Children shrieked and laughed, half terrified and half thrilled, while adults offered wine and incense, hoping the spirit of the real Zhong Kui would be pleased by the honour and keep their homes safe for another year. Painters and calligraphers also found endless inspiration in his form. Scrolls depicted him in countless variations. Zhong Kui riding a tiger through the clouds, Zhong Kui lifting goblets of wine while demons cowered at his feet, Zhong Kui resting while his bound imps scurried about carrying cages of shrieking ghosts. In some depictions he was even shown with humour, a stern but oddly fatherly figure, scolding demons as though they were unruly children. These images, pasted on doors or gifted between families, carried the weight of protection, but also a touch of familiarity, as though Zhong Kui had become both guardian and household companion. Literature too wove him into its pages. Poets referenced him as a symbol of justice against corruption, a reminder that even if immortals failed, heaven and the underworld would not forget. In tales told by travelling storytellers, Zhong Kui became the star of ghostly adventures, battling monsters in far-off provinces, striking bargains with spirits, or even tricking demons into serving tea in his household. The longer his story lived, the more layers it gained. Part terrifying avenger, part comic figure, part divine guardian. His role was so deeply ingrained that even emperors sought him in ritual. During outbreaks of plague, or when ominous omens appeared, they would summon priests to perform rites invoking Zhong Kui's name, asking him to chase away spirits of disease or misfortune. Court painters produced grand images of him that were burned in rituals, the smoke carrying his likeness into the heavens as a signal for his protection. What made Zhong Kui unique among cultural icons was how fully he bridged the gap between fear and comfort. His face was dreadful, his sword merciless, his voice booming with authority, and yet people invited that dread into their lives, painted it onto their doors, staged it in their festivals. They embraced what once caused rejection. In that transformation lay the heart of his legend. What had been a curse in life became the very mark of his sanctity in death. Generations came to see Zhong Kui not only as a story of one man's fate, but as a reminder that injustice could be turned into purpose, that suffering could become strength, and that the very thing others mocked could one day be what saved them. And so, whether in the painted masks of opera, the ink strokes of scrolls, or the paper charms pasted on doors, Zhong Kui lived on, a figure both terrifying and beloved, eternally striding the line between the mortal world and the shadowed realm beyond. Across East Asia, Zhong Kui's image still hangs on doorways during the New Year. Families paste bold red prints of his fierce face and sword upon their thresholds, a promise that when the year turns and wandering spirits prowl, they will find no entry here. In some regions, his likeness is paired with those of his demon servants, depicted hauling away grotesque figures of pestilence and bad luck. Children, who once hid their faces at his stern eyes, are taught to see him as their defender, the frightening guardian who keeps nightmares away. Festivals keep him alive in motion and sound. In southern China, Taiwan and beyond, troops of performers still don his robes and painted mask, marching through streets to scatter bad spirits. The air fills with drums, firecrackers and shouts as Zhong Kui leads the way, flanked by chains of actors portraying demons. For a moment, the ancient stories feel alive again. People laugh, cheer, and bow, as if the real Demon Queller himself had walked among them. Even in modern homes, Zhong Kui's role as protector of scholars has not vanished. Students preparing for difficult exams keep small charms or images of him, invoking his blessing to guard against failure. Though the imperial examinations are long gone, the spirit of endurance and the sting of injustice remain. And in Zhong Kui, students see someone who understands both the struggle and the triumph beyond it. Artists too continue to reimagine him. Painters carve his visage into bold brushstrokes, while filmmakers and novelists give him new battles against modern demons, metaphors for corruption, greed, or fear itself. In this way, Zhong Kui remains a mirror for every age. Wherever evil takes form, his figure can be reshaped to meet it, always with the same blazing eyes and unyielding sword. What makes his legend endure is the transformation at its core. In life, he was mocked, rejected, and destroyed because of how he looked. In death, that very feature became his power, his weapon, his crown. To those who honour him, Zhong Kui is proof that what the world rejects can become divine, that injustice can be reshaped into justice, and that even the deepest wound can forge a protector for generations. And so he lingers, in painted charms, in operatic songs, in festivals under firelit skies, in whispered prayers before exams, in stories told to children at night. Zhong Kui, the scholar denied. Zhong Kui, the Demon Queller. Zhong Kui, the eternal guardian. For as long as there are shadows, his legend will not fade.